Welcome to the Quickshow tutorial, Chapter 8 on Quick Timeline. Quick Timeline is located down here in the Quick Tools. Just click on it and it will open up. What Quick Timeline allows you to do is create a queue that will be a more complex queue than a normal queue. A normal queue would hold, for example, an animation or a graphic or a text or something like that. A quick timeline type queue enables you to make a queue that has more complexity than normal, or even a complete laser show. So let's take a look at how you would make up a quick timeline type queue or a complete laser show. As you know, you can come up here and click on queues. What you can do is you can actually click on a queue and drag and drop it down here into the timeline. And we can zoom in on that and very precisely position and then stretch that out in time. This area up here is the time slider. So what I've done is I've stretched this queue out for 8 seconds. Let's say we only want that to play for 6 seconds. So we have this queue playing for 6 seconds. What we could do is have another queue. For example, this queue, let's say we want this queue to play for 6 seconds as well. So we have our total time of 12 seconds. So what we have basically is first this queue plays for 6 seconds, and then this queue plays for 6 seconds, and let's say that's our whole show. So we can drag and drop that to a queue, and so now we have a queue that's 12 seconds long, and it doesn't do just one thing. Each one of these queues does only a single thing. This queue does two separate things sequentially. Go ahead and enable laser output so that you can see that. So as you can see, one thing that you can do with Quick Timeline is make up a queue that's just more complex than normal. And these queues could be anything. They could be simple graphic queues like that. It could even be beam sequences that you drag and drop down in here. Or it could be DMX sequence or anything like that. To completely clear out this and start anew, we'll just say Menu, File, New Show. So let's say we want to create a complete laser show and something a bit more complex, including music. We'll come over here and say Menu, Set Audio File, and now what you do is browse through your computer, picking the audio file that you want to use. For example, the Pangolin 15-second ID music, which I can't play because I'm using this video capture software to do this tutorial. It will not play on the speakers at the same time as what I'm doing this. But you can see the audio waveform in there, and we can zoom in on that like this. We can move around on the timeline and in the audio here like that. And now what we can do is drag and drop cues down in here to create the laser show. Now ordinarily we have these buttons up here, which as soon as I click on a cue it's going to start it. But that doesn't have to be the case. If I click on the select button here, now I can click on cues without actually starting them. So this would normally be the mode that you use to construct a laser show. So let's say, for example, I want to, again, we'll zoom in on that a little bit. I want to have this cue, let's say, run it first for around 6 seconds. Now, one of the things that you'll notice is that you have multiple tracks here. Although, when you have an audio file loaded and you get into one track, you start to see that it starts to get a little bit cramped. And so this area can actually be resized so that we can have a more convenient more easy access to this area here. So let's say this is part of our show, and I'm going to use this cue next as another part of the show. I'll drop that there, stretch that out to here. And so now what we see is that there's a slight overlap in time where we have this cue playing, and then we have this other cue playing at the same time for a period of time that the other one's playing. Well, Quickshow really allows you to do a couple of things pretty easily. One of them is, if you notice these little triangles here on each end of these timeline elements. And what these little triangles will do, if we move our mouse all the way up there, we can grab that triangle and move it over. And this is like fading out now. And this one also has a triangle on it. If I drag this one to the right, this one's going to be fading in. So what we see if we use our time slider, this is fading out while the other one's fading in. And so we can do crossfades pretty easily with this software. Just like that. Just like all of the other quick tools, we can show it now so that we could see this on the laser output while we're building our show. Or we can elect not to show it now, and we might elect not to show it if we have some other laser content going there at the time that we're building this show. One of the things that you'll notice is that the cue up here is walking a lot more quickly than it is when I'm playing it in the show. And that's because each event here allows us to control how that animation happens. If I right click and say event properties, unfortunately with the screen capture software it's not capturing what's on the very bottom, but there's a menu at the very bottom that says event properties, which will bring up this. And so now what we could do is we can control how this animation happens. We could say, okay, it's a time-based animation which happens, let's say, the total seconds, let's say 1. And that's the total time it's going to take to perform one animation. So that's going to speed up the animation a bit. So that's a bit faster. As you can see here, there are also other ways that you can animate this, and it's similar to the same dialog box and same properties that you have up here in terms of how the animation happens. So that's how you would control the speed of the animation. Also, each cue you can assign to zones like this. And we can assign this entire track to zones if we want to by choosing track properties. So what we could do is we can override any particular zone assignment of the cues on that track like this. Say if we want all of them to go to track 5, and it'll say, okay, everything in this track now will go to zone 5. We can even direct it to multiple zones if we want to, say 5 and 6. So that's how you would direct this to multiple zones at the same time. And as you may have discovered, zones are really an alternative way of getting to projectors and scanners. So if you had multiple FB3s loaded, they would show up down here, and so you can direct perhaps this one to scanner 1, and this track to scanner 2, and this track to scanner 3, and so forth. And you do that with these zone assignments. So we've covered how to drag and drop events onto the timeline. We've covered an easy way of doing crossfade. I'll show you another way of putting an event on the timeline as well, which is, you'll notice these buttons up here, which if this one is pressed, I can select an event. So I can select it and move it like that. We can move the edges of it just by moving the mouse over to here, and this will allow us to move the time. Right now I have something called snapping enabled. That's this little magnet button here. If we turn this off, now I can have very free motion of the time when this event will be starting and ending. There's another button up here which is like a pencil tool, and this allows you to draw an event on the timeline like that. Ordinarily what you're drawing is what happens to be selected. But if I right click on these events, any of them, and choose open image, then what I can do is load some graphic images that aren't like that. Let me see what we've got here. Okay. So there's our little animation that we just loaded. A whole little, all the frames in this 40-hour-a-week laser show. So that is how you would load something that's not in the workspace here. So what you could do is drag and drop events from the workspace into here, or go out and get frames. Just right click, open image, and then come over here into frames, like LD2000, frames, abstract, and have just that one little frame there. There's another thing to notice. I'm going to go ahead and delete that one. Another thing to notice here is this little icon here that looks like an arrow. That means pointer. And you'll notice that this doesn't have an arrow. What that means is that in this part of the laser show, it's pointing to this cue right here. And if I collapse this, we'll see that this cue now all of a sudden has that little pointer icon there. And what that means is that what this is really doing is pointing to this cue within the workspace. Right? So what that means is that if I change the contents of this, like for example, if I come up here and clear that out, and then I draw the word bill, come back into the timeline. Now we see that it says bill. It's no longer got the flamingo because this cue really is simply pointing to this. If we want to make it so that the laser show will always play the same thing no matter what the content of this, no matter if this changes sometime later on, what we would do is right click on this event and select convert to local cue. And so what that will do is it will convert this to a local, it's hard to see this one because this screen capture software, but I click convert to local cue. The pointing icon goes away, and now this show will be the same. For example, now it uses this bill and this frog. I can come over here and edit this frog animation. Just clear this out and draw 1, 2, 3. So I've modified this cue here, but in the show itself we've still got the frog because we've converted that to a local cue. It means it's put it in here into local memory. So we can see we've got our little crossfade there, jumping frog, getting into our little abstract there. And we have some tools here that may help us during the editing process. This one here, which is sets the start time, and this one that sets the end time. So if I press play now, it will play between those markers. So this may be handy for us. For example, if I'm trying to do some fine editing here while I'm listening to the music, trying to adjust some timing elements here. So there's another aspect of editing shows that I'll show you next. I'm going to do File, New, just to clear all of this stuff out. And I'll get some more simple items just to show some aspects of this. like this square here. I'll just drag and drop that square down there. And yeah, maybe this is good. Drag and drop this down onto the cue as well. And we'll go ahead and zoom in on that. It's a bit hard to see that box. And there's that cue. So we have two cues here. I'll make them overlap a little bit. We'll zoom in on that a little bit more too. We have our full-size box and our crystal. Let's say we want this to change shapes and rotate and maybe even change color over time over the course of this show. What we can do is if you right-click on this event and choose Edit Event Effect, now you come to the event editor here, which also has a timeline, but it has these buttons here that will allow you to influence what happens to this square that we have, which you can see here, as the time goes. So for example, if I start here, let's say I want that square to start off small. Just click on size, click and drag the mouse in this window. What you'll see is that we can resize this. And now I'm going to click on position and I'm going to say, okay, well this starts up here. And so that's the start time since I had my time slider here. And what we could say is, well, at 100% time, the position goes back to the center and makes the size go bigger. So I click on size. I'm just going to click and drag that upward. So what we can see here is as time goes, this starts here at that size, and as the time goes, this square gets bigger and it grows. What we could do, we could also put a rotation on that. We could say, okay, well, when you're here, the rotation angle is going to be about like that. Maybe I'll move that down a little bit. And then as the time gets to 100%, the rotation angle comes, maybe we make a complete rotation. That'll make it more interesting. So now you can see that you can do this rotation as the time goes. We can do everything with this. We could say it starts off dimmer than normal, and as the time goes on, the brightness goes back up to full brightness. And we could say that the color changes as well. We come over here and say this starts off red, and then as the time goes, it becomes blue. And how we come up with that was just double click in this area here and you'll have that little color dialog box. Same thing we can do with size. You have this very precise control afforded by this dialog box. That's done with the right mouse button. So each one of these, if I have rotation selected, I can click the right mouse button and come up with this very precise rotation tool here that will allow me to rotate on multiple axes at the same time. So that's how you control events and how you edit them with this event editor. And you see we have a little bit of overlap there, so I can make this fade out and make this one fade in. That crystal, we could say, well, we like the way that rotates, but what we would really like, right click on this event, say Edit Event Effect. The color of that crystal really is not to our liking. We could say we're going to come over here to the color. Now since we're over here in the actual event itself, we are, as you see, as this crystal is fading in. So at this point, the crystal really isn't visible in our preview window. But that's okay. We can just still set the color there. Simply right-click in here to bring up this color dialog and say, well, maybe we would want that crystal to be blue. So now the crystal's blue. So we can recolorize that very easily. Just like that. If we get it looking the way we want, find an empty queue and simply drag and drop that to a queue so that at any point in time we want to see that, we can just click on it and there's our show. Here's our other show. Just click on that and it'll start playing. If we want to edit this show, it works just like any other editing with Quickshow. Simply drag and drop this down to this area. The black arrows flash indicating that this is the tool that you use to edit that item. Drop that on there and it will load that right in there. Same way with this. So we can edit anything that we create. There's one more point, which is once you have one of these shows, if you right-click here and choose Queue Properties, this will allow you to control the show. So whether the show will play once and stop, or whether the show will just continue playing over and over and over again, is controlled by that checkbox in the Queue Properties. So reviewing the steps needed to make a complete laser show. Come down here to Quick Timeline and click on it. Might want to expand this area a bit just by clicking here and then dragging upward. You can load an audio file just like this. Load this WAV file here. We support WAV or MP3 files, and when you load a WAV or an MP3 file, Quickshow will automatically extract the waveform like that, which you can use to help you while you're editing the show. These buttons here allow you to zoom in on the show, and then this slider here allows you to move around in time. So we have our audio loaded. We can go into a select mode and drag and drop cues down here onto the timeline. You can have a cross-fading arrangement very easily like this. And if the animation speed of the cue is not to your liking, you can edit this by right-clicking and choosing Event Properties, or by clicking on this button here. And we can say we want it to be a time-based animation, frames per second much more quickly, maybe 10. If we want to change the size, position, or color of this, we simply double-click on this and come up with the event editor, which allows us to control the size, position of this in time. So for example, it's going to start there, and as time goes by before the crossfade, we can say that the position comes down here and the size gets bigger. This particular view allows for very quick and easy access. We can get finer access in higher resolution by right-clicking in here, and now we can get very precise control over things, each one of the items as well. We can control the color as well. Let's choose color, right-click, say we want it to start off red, and then when it gets down to here we want it to become green. So that's how you edit events. Each one of the events that we have placed there creates something called a key. That's this little orange item here. The keys can be seen within the event itself. We see the little kind of white dots and the black line beneath that. If we click here, we can expand this area, which allows us to see the actual individual keys themselves, what makes up the size, position, rotation, color, and so forth. So that's done by just clicking on this. We could also click here to expand the view of the audio waveform if we want to get a bigger view. We can, in addition to dragging and dropping events, this little arrow here where we can select it, we can choose the little pencil here, which allows us to draw an event onto the timeline. That's like drawing. And the events don't have to be restricted to just cues here. They can be frames that we can load. You just right click and say open image, and then we can come over in LD2000 and choose any frame, or any ILDA frame, anything that was supported with LD2000, our QM32 series, Quickshow, Live Quick, LA Studio, different frame formats like that, even the ILDA format. So you can incorporate frames from the disk into your Quickshow as well. We'll do a little crossfade there as well. We can show it now so that we can have output on the laser while we're building the show. Or we could build the show without showing it to the people. So that, for example, if we have a laser show going on, we could be building a laser show while the actual laser output is showing a completely different show. So that we can be creating a brand new show and the people don't really know we're creating this. Once we get this looking the way we want, we just drag and drop it to a cue, and it's always there anytime we need it. Just click on it. It will automatically start the music and play the show exactly as we created it. You see the little CD icon there. This is like representing that music is incorporated along with the show. If I right click and choose Cue Properties, this shows us about the show. So for example, this says play cue once and stop. If we uncheck this, then the cue will continue to play over and over and over again. Of course, this cue is about 15 seconds long. So at the end of it, it'll keep on playing instead of just playing once. Each time I click on this show, it will play the music along with the show. And another noteworthy thing about this is that when you load music file in this show, what Quickshow will do is make a copy of that in the Quickshow folder. Here, music for shows. It creates a copy of that. So what that means is that if I delete the music later from the original location, Quickshow will still have it locally, and so Quickshow will always be able to find that music anytime it needs it. In addition to creating events on here which are cues or frames, we can also do effects as well along with this. So to do that, what we can do is say Menu, Add an Effect Line. I'm going to click on here and say Menu, Add an Effect Line, and it will add a little effect timeline down there, which we can take the pencil tool and draw in there. And now we come over here to the effect editor and we can add an effect to that, for example an oscillating zoom effect.